Hey there, Nate. So I've been getting some positive feedback about some recent episodes we've done. One in particular I'm thinking about was the episode we did on one sheets. It just seems like there's a lot of fascination around things that Brooklyn Music Factory is doing. And as we get started in the episode, everybody wants to know what Nate's doing. But not everybody is asking about how Nate's doing. How are you doing, Nate?
Everybody wants to know what Nate's... It's not nearly as exciting as you imagine my life to be. I'm doing great. Feeling good. Getting ready for another stair race and feeling physically good. And, so great. How you doing, Daniel?
No, I'm doing really well. Things are really exciting right now. Just in the business, where tons of people are inquiring about grouplessons.com. I'm doing some fun stuff this summer, doing a lot of traveling. And so that's what I've got on the agenda. But what we have on the agenda for the podcast today is more of what folks are asking for. And Nate, you showed me a question that was asked in the Big Music Games community. So obviously Big Music Games is one of our sponsors, and there are a lot of schools now that are licensing the Big Music Games system from Brooklyn Music Factory. And there's a group of school owners that all congregate together. It's a private group for only those who are using it, or actually, is it only owners who are using it, or is it everybody who's even interested? How does that work, Nate?
Yeah, so right now we have an open community, and we're inviting anyone and everyone to come play the game and then join us in the forum. Plus, I actually personally lead a training every Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. So we have a bunch of teachers that come in and spend 25 minutes together. So yeah, it's wide open right now. Won't be forever, but I do encourage everybody to come start gamifying lessons in a really fun and effective way by visiting bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And so there's a site that's just for our listeners, Daniel, and you can sign up and start playing games for free today. So we have tons of teachers doing it, and it's really, really encouraging to see so many school owners and teachers that want to shift from the traditional lesson and try to gamify their lessons more. So great. Come join us, bigmusicgames.com/7FMS.
Getting back to why I asked you about the group, one of the people in the group of Big Music Games asked the question that inspired this episode today. I'm just going to read the question here. How do you track teacher performance, and what metrics do you have? So far, I only have feedback from parents, but would like to start measuring and tracking teacher performance. Now, I will say that it wasn't terribly recently, but we did do an episode on performance reviews for teachers, an episode 101. So I'm your podcast sommelier, and I would say if you want to pair an episode with this episode today, go back and check out 101. But I do think that what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different from there, because in that episode, we were just talking about the process of doing performance reviews, making it systematic in the school so that this crucial thing you need to do doesn't get left by the wayside. But today, I think we want to focus on how do you actually measure teacher performance, which I think is a really important topic, because if you have a school that relies on the efforts of your teaching staff, so many important metrics that you're tracking will be directly connected to how well those teachers are teaching the students, how well they're bonding with the student, how well they're communicating with the parents. Retention, overall profitability, your margins, re-enrollment in the fall, all of this is directly connected to these teacher performance characteristics. And so I think we should just do a deep dive to see how Brooklyn Music Factory looks at teacher performance. So Nate, starting out, let me just ask a question. And this one might seem obvious, but I think I really want to know your perspective on this. Why does Brooklyn Music Factory track teacher performance?
Great question. I think it's the kind of question that might make people wonder if they've been primarily a single teacher studio that's looking to grow into a multi-teacher studio. So they been essentially measuring themselves to date, right, Daniel? They're like, well, I'm doing great. I'm retaining most of my students. So naturally, if I bring on one or two teachers, they're all just going to follow the same path. The truth is that if you get really clear on what the purpose and the values of your studio are, and therefore how you're going to deliver on promise, all these things that we've talked about in a number of episodes, you then need to set up a system to try to support your teachers so that they can actually grow and perform a little bit better every season and every year. And so, of course, all the things you just listed, dude, around like, well, you want to improve student retention. Everybody knows that retention and sort of churn rate, as like SaaS companies call it, retention is essential, right? If you're burning through students, you're going to spend a whole lot of time on marketing and sales and not nearly enough time on operations and delivering on promise. So, of course, those metrics are important. Your profitability, your growth rate, all these things rely on the fact that teachers are delivering on promise and doing it a little bit better than they did the season before. So, the bottom line is that we're all human. We all have room to grow. And at BMF, one of our core values is be the best version of yourself. You can't be the best version of yourself if you're not measuring where you are now and looking ahead to where you might want to be, next season. So that's really the core principle behind, measuring teacher performance.
I love that. Before we get into what you actually measure, I think it'd be interesting to discuss for just a second what you use to measure. And what I mean by that is, let me just give an example. We have project management software for grouplessons.com/Piano Express, and that's what we use to assign things to all the members of our team. We use Slack here at the podcast to communicate with our podcast team. Like, there's a tool that we use. I'm curious if there's a tool that you use to track teacher performance, or if it's a little more informal. Is it paper and ink? Is it a software? Like, what do you guys do?
Yeah, I think actually similar to what you were talking about with PX and project management. It's kind of a suite of tools. And it also shifts ever so slightly depending on the season and what you're measuring when you're measuring it. But the most important tool we use is a dashboard on the software that runs our company. And actually, like, Big Music Games lives on this, and it's software that we've developed to run BMF and that we also house Big Music Games on it, that kind of thing. But on this dashboard, it essentially measures what we call our big three. So I have a big three. I'm a teacher, and it just shows on the dashboard, am I communicating consistently? And basically all it's measuring, Daniel, is, did I send my lesson reports? But in truth, all it is a glorified spreadsheet. So it could be Airtable, it could be Google Sheets for a listener, right? Another tool we use right now around re-enrollment is Typeform. It's basically just a form program, and what it does is it generates reports. And so right now we share a form with all of our teachers, and they share that form with their families. And so Typeform becomes a way of generating whether or not families are responding to our teachers, right? We've got a report that we can generate. One other tool that we use really simply is just within Big Music Games, we actually have a tracking report, and it will just simply show what teachers are playing what games, how many minutes on average every day, that kind of thing. And so even though that sort of sounds sort of Big Brother-ish, in our case, we want to measure whether or not we're actually delivering on our methodology, and Big Music Games is foundational to it, right? So we measure how much is Nate actually playing the games every week. Dig it? So Those are 3 examples of tools. Absolutely, like you mentioned in passing, Airtable, is that an Airtable thing? As we've discussed before, Airtable's big on what we do. But we don't necessarily think you need to be fancy in the tools you use, but we do think you need to be consistent in the tools you use, and you need to be very clear, as we're going to get to later, behind the why. Like, what's the why behind this tool versus that tool and that tool? Every tool should have a very clear why, and then how you're using it. We do also use Google Forms. We do a version of surveying. So in other words, we will survey directors and they will give us responses on how they view their faculty. So we do use that tool as well. So within the G Suite, we'll use seasonal surveys where we'll ask for feedback.
Interesting.
So that's another tool we use. And I kind of want to stress this, Daniel, because I think sometimes our listeners will listen to a litany of tools that, say, BMF is using or another school, a guest we're interviewing, and they'll get kind of caught up in the tool. They'll be like, it's all about the tool. Well, okay, to a degree it is. Like, you're absolutely right, Daniel. Like, you guys do, you manage complex projects, so you use Asana, which is a great project management tool. But the value of having this list of tools is not getting all the tools once you stop listening to this episode. It's actually choosing one or two tools and then deciding for the next year you're going to learn how to use that effectively. So I just want to highlight that. It's not about the tools. It's about choosing a handful of tools, understanding why you're choosing that, and then committing to learning how to use it well and use it consistently. Dig it?
Oh, yeah. That's great. And I think as we get into the what and how you measure teacher performance, it will become more apparent how one might use a stack of tools like what you just suggested.
Right.
Because when you talk about surveying the directors, you could use anything. You use Google Forms because it's ubiquitous. We use Google Forms a ton. But it's really about, hey, I need this information from this person. What's the most efficient way to get it? So
Totally.
Yeah. I was recently speaking with a client, and there was just a question of, and actually we dealt with this way long ago, like somewhere around episode 50. We had an episode where we talked about, do I need to nag my teachers? Remember that one, Nate? That was like 70 something episodes ago. And similar to that, this question came up. Another school owner who was basically asking me, what's the level of investment I should expect from this person? What's the level of response time I should expect from this person on my team? And the first question I asked them was, well, what is your communications policy? What's your employee handbook say? Oh, we don't have one of those. Oh, okay. So then no expectation. All right. Well, there you go. And yeah. I guess my point is, I don't want to get too far afield from the topic here. My point is that when you make it easy for someone to respond to you by pushing a form to them and saying, fill this out by Friday, instead of like, hey, can you give me a general idea of what it is you've been doing with the students lately? And you just leave it completely open-ended. Again, this is where a tool can be helpful. And I don't want to belabor this point because I'm sure people have ways of collecting this, but if not, here's a good example.
Can I give you one? And yeah. I think your point is worth actually doubling down for a second on. So someone might be listening and saying, but isn't Typeform just a fancy Google form? And so why are you choosing to use Typeform when messaging to parents, but a Google form when messaging to your directors and da-da-da-da-da? And this isn't about getting caught in the weeds right now. Typeform is an incredibly user-friendly, beautiful form tool. And all they do is create beautiful forms. And so we spend I just looked up, literally while we were chatting, I looked up how much does BMF invest in Typeform every month? $54.40 a month. And that allows us to get 5,000 responses on a Typeform. We reserve Typeform only for customer-facing, beautiful forms that are easy to use, where you can put in all kinds of great logic. So if they're kids age 6, they only get fed the next question, blah, 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 right? We use Google Forms for all of our internal systems. Why? Because it's super easy to build. Anybody can build one in 5 minutes or less. And like you said, it's ubiquitous and it's within our G Suite and it's easy to organize. So anyways, that's just an example of know the tool, choose the tool, build a system for the tool, and then just keep using that tool for that system.
I think that's a good overview of what you use to measure teacher performance. I think now we should get into probably what is going to be the bulk of this episode. How do you measure teacher performance? Again, this is such an important topic. This will determine the culture of the school, profitability, retention, all those things we said at the top of the show. How do you measure? What is it that you're measuring? I know you must have a laundry list.
You know, Daniel, when we were prepping for this ep, I was like, okay, well, we've done a really good episode on the process of teacher performance and how to, well, all staff performance reviews, not just teachers, but and in it, of course, I mentioned our big three, which is, the three measures of success for a teacher, and I'll just state them out loud. But then when we were prepping, I was like, let me actually go look for a longer list that we have of how we measure teacher performance. But first of all, the big three are just communicate consistently, use Brooklyn Music Factory unique curriculum materials, how consistently are our teachers using those, and therefore following the methodology and the promise. And then finally, building community, because that's literally the core of our promise, is that if a student or a family enrolls at BMF, that their community will grow over the 7 to 10 years they're with us. I.e., those musicians will play with more and more different musicians and make more friends and blah, blah, blah. All that's good stuff. So what I did, though, is I wanted to go deeper into sort of these different metrics, Daniel. So I pulled up our contract and I said, well, what's baked in there around when a teacher says, we're in the season right now where teachers are saying, hey, I'm psyched to be here for another year. I'm wondering if you can pay me more. They're asking, some of them ask for raises. Some of them ask for raises based on specific things like, hey, if I'm teaching a group class, can I get paid more? So they make all these requests. And there's not that many, but you'll get some. And so it's really valuable, back to your previous point, if you don't put in writing how you measure a teacher's performance, then it's hard to come back and answer whether or not they're going to get a raise, right? So let me read the list from our contract offer. It says Brooklyn Music Factory pay raises are based on number of semesters you've taught, so that's experience. Most job sites use that. The assumption is that if you've been teaching at BMF for 1 year, you're not quite as strong in delivering on promise as the teacher that's been teaching for 3 years, right? So it's just an experiential metric. Raises are based on the number of days per week you're teaching. So again, if you're a teacher who's like, you know what, I'm really only good for 1, maybe 2 days a week, well, then that's a different metric, right? That to us is a measure of engagement within our community internally, right? The next one is number of camp days taught per year. We've done so many good episodes on how valuable camp can be to a school. Well, it's really valuable to us that our teachers are engaged across the board in camp and after school and other services we offer. Student retention, you've already mentioned that. Of course, that's a key metric. Consistent attendance, right? So some teachers struggle with consistently showing up. That's really going to make it very difficult to both want to retain that teacher and also give them any kind of raise or promotion. And then finally, we put in re-enrollment. Re-enrollment is a huge metric for us. We've done some really good EPs on it. And maybe we can put those in the show notes. But right now, BMF is in a re-enrollment season. So we're going to measure how many families have responded saying that they want that teacher again next fall. And then we're going to measure exactly how many of those families actually put down a deposit and committed to a schedule next fall with every teacher, including myself, Daniel. I've got, I don't know how many students I have, 12 to 15. It's not like I'm an exception to the rule. All of us measure the same way, right? I measure my attendance and I'm the founder. It's like, am I actually showing up to the job site consistently? Because otherwise, if I'm not, I know this might seem obvious to all of our listeners, but you build a quality, long-term, sustainable business based on trust. Families develop trust with you, and one of the ways they develop trust with you is because you show up consistently, right? And so if attendance is spotty, or you're sick often, or there's, for whatever reason, you're not showing up consistently, these families don't trust that you're actually going to be able to deliver on promise. So that's what we measure. And I think that's plenty of things to measure, honestly. Between you and I, Daniel, if we started measuring even more than that, it'd get a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree. I guess just what strikes me about this is I wish we had our listeners here in a big room with us just to quiz you on these things. I wonder, as people listen to this, if they're surprised at the things you measure. I wonder if they are, if it seems, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I wonder if people, and this is the one that I'm curious about actually personally. I wonder if people would think that you had some sort of exotic system for measuring teacher performance. Just getting into the weeds, having these calculations and equations of, so you could generate a number that lets you know the value of this human that works for you, something like that. Just reduces them down to a number, because some of these things are quite mundane.
Yeah.
Did they attend? How many did the students re-enroll? I wonder if those listening or watching on YouTube hear this and say, oh, wait, we measure? I thought it was my job to re-enroll students. So wait, we measure the teacher's performance based on how many of their students re-enrolled? I thought that was for me. Wow. I'm sure there's some minds that are being blown right now.
Can I go a level deeper? I mean,
sure.
I know I can go a level deeper with you, Daniel. I'm asking our listeners to stick with me on this.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right on the money there when you say there's a mindset shift that happens for owners, which is, hey, I'm not bearing the full weight of this school. If I'm building a team that's invested in our growing population of students and families, then I'm asking them to invest their intention and their time and their energy into retaining those families, right? It's not just a lesson by lesson, giving a good lesson. It's imagining that student a year from now at the school, 3 years from now at the school. So just a quick recap on how we do re-enrollment. Stage 1 is we send musician's journey reports out to all of our students. We've done a really good episode on that, or multiple episodes on that. And that we measure. What percentage of your students have gotten their musician's journey reports? All of the teachers measure, and we will publicly declare, literally, I've sent 80% of them. I've sent 90% of them. I've sent 100%. In fact, at the last all-staff meeting, Daniel, we broke out and gave people writing time, paid them for writing time. We also we do writing parties. We've talked about that. We measure attendance at the musician's journey writing parties, right? So step 1 of measuring a teacher's performances, are they actually sending all of these sort of glorified report cards to the families, letting them know where they imagine their students can be. Measurement number 2 is we ask them all to send out this type form, which says, what are your intentions next fall? It's a very general type form. Again, at the all staff, we break out for half an hour. We give them a template and with the link, and we're like, go send them to all of your families. And if you don't get them done right now, please get them done by the end of the week. And then we actually literally measure how many families have replied, and we look at which teachers on the type form get mentioned the most, i.e., do you want to stick with your teacher next fall? If so, yes. Who's your teacher? They click the button. It's not surprising. I'm reading you the report. We're 5 days into it. 22% of all respondents of our type form marked Ben Healy, saying, we want Ben next fall. Well, he's the private lesson director. Would you expect him to be the number one? Of course you'd expect him to be the number one, right? Most families early on are going to request the person that they've known for, in his case, some of these families have known him for 7 years, 10 years. So anyways, we're measuring now, are families even requesting that teacher? And then the third measurement we're measuring is our families paying a deposit and actually getting scheduled with the teacher, right? And again, we're going to ask those teachers. We're going to put posters up all in the community room, QR codes. They can scan the QR code and request the teacher. They can see the teacher's schedule from the QR code. And this is all done by June 1st in anticipation of next fall. And why do we measure these different things? Number of deposits paid for a teacher, number of type form responses requesting the teacher, number of musicians' journeys that every teacher sent out. Why do we all share that and measure that and share it publicly, Daniel, by June 1st? Is because it's around June 1st when we're building all of our inventory and creating and making job offers for another year with the entire community of teachers. So we're like measuring all of these things, and we're saying, hey, teachers, we really want you back. And so we're going to measure how much the families want you back. And it's a fascinating mindset shift, because it's not saying that families decide everything, because obviously it's on us to train and retain great teachers. But we are saying that for this business to be viable, we need to retain, in the case of Brooklyn Music Factory, we want to retain 75% of our families by June 1st. We want them to have been committed. 75% by the end of June. By June 1st, we want, I think it's like 65% to have been committed. And so those are just pure business metrics. 65% retention by June 1st for the fall means that we can now start budgeting and mapping out a beautiful fall with a great staff of amazing teachers. And so, we're talking about performance reviews and what we measure. Well, here's a really important seasonal measuring opportunity, which is in your spring. And of course, that moves through the summer, and we continue to track that sort of thing, through the busy re-enrollment period. The busy open enrollment in August and September. But the reality is we want all our teachers, we want to be open and transparent about the opportunity ahead and how we measure success. And we are totally open and transparent. These are public dashboards. It's not like I'm like going one-on-one with a teacher and being like, hey, I'm a little concerned. We're just literally saying, hey, here's how we're doing so far as a school. And we're not like going to highlight someone who's really struggling, because that's not humane in a public forum. But we're gonna make sure that everybody knows this is where we're trying to get to as a community, and all of you have an impact on getting us there.
What this does is it takes this abstract concept that in isolation could be dehumanizing and saying, oh, actually, this is serving a bigger purpose. Like, we're not just measuring this thing for the sake of measuring it. It's actually connecting it in the mind of the team members that are working for you. It's connecting in their mind to the reason that one of the reasons that they're likely motivated, i.e., to some degree, they have to be motivated by working with kids, being in education. And so it's not just, oh, hey, I'm going to measure your performance. You're doing the work for them of thinking through how the things that you're measuring actually impact the kids, impact the students. Yes. And so it becomes less, again, about this abstract number equation, robotic equation that I was joking about earlier, and brings it full circle. And I think that's really important, and I can't stress this enough, because no one will think as deeply about your school as you do. No one will make the connections that you will unless you explain to the people why this is important. They might make a few connections, but you have the opportunity here to weave the narrative for them. You have the opportunity to tell the story to them of how, yeah, all these things we're measuring, here's how it impacts this 9-year-old's life, how it impacts their experience.
Daniel, and that's why we open with musicians' journey reports. Because it's exactly what you're pointing to. You're saying, okay, we just spent, in our case, the month of April, thinking really clearly about where our student is now and where we want our student to be a year from now, right? So you're talking about the impact on this human. And so now we're just saying, okay, what we're going to do is link that to how convincing we were to families that we can impact this human. And now we're linking, if we were convincing to families, they're going to respond saying, yes, I have faith in your vision for my child. And so then if they have faith in your vision for their child, they're going to say, yes, I will pay a $95 deposit to ensure that my child has the opportunity to realize that vision. And you're so absolutely right, because I think we so often as business owners get caught in these metrics as if they are abstract. They're not abstract metrics. And in fact, what do we have? We have all kinds of we have terms for abstract metrics. They're called vanity metrics. You're like, forget vanity metrics.
Yeah.
You're like a metrics wonder guy. I love your marketing dashboard that you have your clients build. I have an example here that I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to refine based on what you trained to, Daniel. But you've really just sort of whittled it down to what actually matters.
Yeah.
And the same has to hold true with what we're measuring of our teachers. Don't measure any more than you need to, but don't measure so little that you can't actually have clear conversations with them on how to improve.
Yeah, and I just want to point out to those listening or watching on YouTube that notice what Nate did there. He went immediately back to the musician's journey report. And I would just say, look how all this ties together. It isn't just the performance reviews. It's not just what they measure. It's not just the musician's journey report. It's this cohesive system that doesn't leave anyone behind. And this is your podcast sommelier again, saying that if you want to hear our episode on musician's journey reports, you're going to have to go all the way back, almost 100 episodes, to episode 29.
What? That's like season 1.
Yeah, we'll drop that in the show notes. That was early 2022.
Wow, look at us.
Yeah. Cool, Nate. Hey everyone, we're trying something a little bit different this week. We had a very, very long conversation. We decided to split this episode into 2 parts. And so if you're watching this the week it gets released, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to come back same bat time, same bat channel next week to listen to the rest of this episode. If you're watching this in the future, you can just hit next to go straight to the next episode and hear the conclusion of this awesome conversation that Nate and I had about teacher performance and how to get the most out of the teachers in your school. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.